drop my calculator. What good is this? All right, I'm going to start with a little preamble, and then I'm going to introduce our distinguished guest today, and then I'll introduce myself, not as distinguished as these two gentlemen. I didn't memorize this, I'm sorry, so I'm reading off the prompter. If you live in a condo or an HOA, every year the board of directors is required to create a budget that will cover all the anticipated expenses, and hopefully they will fund your reserve budget. If everything goes to plan, then your community association is running like a Swiss watch. If you plan well and accurately, you'll most certainly hit the nail on the head and your budget will perform as it should. Yet as Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face. So things come up and surprises happen. The wisdom here is that even with the best budgets, community associations will be greeted with surprises. A lot of things break down mechanically. Nobody gets the sniffles before a computer breaks down. Some of these surprises can be natural disasters. In Florida, we have hurricanes and you have some rains and who knows, significant failures of expensive mechanical installations, an economic turndown resulting in delinquencies, and a host of many other events that are unknown and unpredictable. This webinar with the Community Association Manager, I'll introduce in a moment, banker, who I'll introduce in a moment, and me, I'm Mitch Drimmer, I'll introduce myself in a moment, will address what happens, what can be done when a community association finds itself behind from a cash flow perspective. We'll discuss what can happen and what can and often be done to alleviate the pain in the community. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us and turning in onto the webinar today. I'm confident you'll come away with a little more education and understanding of the subject. If not, I'm going to go try and entertain you as best as I can. We have a great crew here today that are perfectly positioned to discuss this critical issue of cash flow in your community association. Let me start by introducing Zed LaCour of PMI Integrity of Louisiana. Zed is the CEO of PMI, which is one of the most, if not the most, because I keep seeing you getting these awards, Zed, community association management company in the PM family of franchises, which is out of Utah. And if you don't know PMI, I recommend you look into them. They have hundreds of offices throughout the United States, tremendous back office. And I have a lot of respect for that company because they're a true management company for community associations, as well as they have 4 other pillars, but I'm not going to discuss that today. We're discussing HOAs. He comes to us with a world of experience when it comes to managing community associations and will provide the inside look as to the workings of community associations and associations' finance and governance. Next, let me introduce Alan Seilheimer, who is a legend in this industry, they tell me. He's a financial expert, he's a banker, well known for providing loans to community associations that either require a line of credit or a loan from a bank for whatever reasons they may need additional funds for. We're going to discuss community association loans. Part of the seminar will be to ask Alan and Zed about when a community might want to seek out a loan. I'm sure Alan has some definite ideas as well as Zed on that. And we're going to talk about the various financial products that a community association can and should have. At last, my name's Mitchell Drimmer. I've been around the community association ever since they were being dug out of caves in the sides of mountains. I'm a licensed community association manager. I'm an accredited collections professional, and that's what I do. I do collections for community associations. And often community associations are faced with delinquent owners. It's always a delinquency. There's always a few people who don't pay. Sometimes it gets very difficult. Sometimes it gets tragedy. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to tee up some nice questions for Alan and Zed to answer. And if we can't get to them during the webinar, we'll answer them by email, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to contact Zed and Alan. All right. I wanted to start this off with a quick survey, but I think that we're already a little running behind schedule. So let's start off with a question. Zed, let me start with you. You've got boots on the ground. You're right there in the middle of the trenches. All community associations, they're businesses, they're incorporated. And although they're mostly incorporated as not-for-profit, that doesn't mean they can't act as a business. It's not a charity, it's a not-for-profit. And there are many reasons why associations experience cash flow problems. Some may be that the budgets were poorly crafted, or unexpected capital projects pop up and reserves are low. People don't pay. What do you believe is a major cause for an association to experience a cash flow problem? Zed, let's start with you.
Well, often we see it's a combination of events. You're right. You kind of hit on a few of those things that happen within an association and why they may experience some cash flow issues. But I think most often we see the issues arise from either being self-managed or not having a good management company. And I'm not just trying to toot our horn as a management company, but that's what we usually see. If we go into a new HOA and we look at the books and there's a lot of collections and there's things going on that just don't look so great, it's typical that, sometimes that's from just being mismanaged and having volunteers trying to do the job over the years and just never really getting it. And then, you're dealing with years of back dues that you have to start collecting, and you have HOAs with no budgets. So, you have to get in there and start from scratch in certain ways and establish a budget, which is our roadmap to, how we're going to spend the money, and then start collecting the money so we can start getting some cash flow for projects and to efficiently run the association.
Okay. Let me throw this over to you, Alan. With all your experience working with community associations, what do you feel is the main cause for cash flow problems? Because when they have a cash flow problem that seems unsurmountable, they're going to roll your way to the banker. So if you please.
Yeah, that's very often the case. And there's two aspects to a community association. One's kind of operational, and the other is, I'll call it capital maintenance oriented. The operational is overall pretty predictable. It's the things like recreational, social, risk management, just general operating costs like your electric bill, your water bill, and your internet bill. All of those things tend to be largely predictable. Your insurance bill, although occasionally we get into years where there's a shock in premiums, but that can be dealt with. The legal risk is a little bit less predictable, and in case there's some kind of a lawsuit or something. But again, these operational type activities are very much more predictable, and they should be easily put into a budget, just as Zed was suggesting, and planned for. You can see trends over years and what types of things are going to occur, how utility bills are increasing, what some of the general costs are that keep increasing, and how much they tend to increase, including insurance bills. You talk to insurance agents, somewhat in advance and get an idea where trends are happening. And all this comes around to having, if you will, a good management company. And I'm an advocate of management companies as well, and that they have strong skills. The denying of operational costs are kind of foolish. They're just going to happen. There's no getting away from them. And when an association's not planning for their operational costs, if you should end up walking over to a bank to get your capital maintenance funded, the bank's going to be kind of squeamish when they don't see those operational costs are being covered. The capital maintenance costs, in my experience over the years and across this country, has been the big bugaboo. And what happens is, because it's unforeseen, and most associations, and I'm going to use the word most, and that's a little bit rigorous, but there's too many associations that don't commission a professional capital maintenance reserve study that plots out the life cycle of all of your common elements. And it's just so critical, because every year everything is wearing out just a little bit, and it's largely predictable, which means it becomes predictable about how much money should be set aside. And in a very real sense, and it's always silly for me to say this, but in a very real sense, if capital maintenance were properly planned for, part of the cash flow, loans, my business, wouldn't need to exist. You'd have reserves set aside. But that gets to be the shock, is when capital maintenance projects haven't been researched and planned for, and with I'll call it a scientist, a reserve study specialist that has studied these things, and it's worth the dollar. What happens is that these things wear out, they don't go away. And the longer you put them off, they get ever more expensive. And then everybody comes to, oh my gosh, the roof is leaking, the wind's coming through the windows, whatever the item is, and now there's a special assessment, and all the unit owners are looking at the board or the management company and going, I can't cut a check for my portion of the special assessment. And these things tend to run routinely $15,000 to $25,000 per unit, and to smooth out that special assessment, that's where the associations come to banks for loans, and loans are available. But the capital maintenance planning, for as far as I can ever see, is the cash flow problem of community associations. Operational exists, repairing the buildings exist, and operational is a bit more able to be planned. Capital maintenance can be planned, but it takes a more proactive effort. And I say that because capital maintenance doesn't necessarily happen every day, whereas paying your electric bill and your internet bill and your insurance bill, those are very obvious bill comes in the mail type expenditures.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I found out, depending on the current political and financial atmosphere, such as an economic turndown. I mean, I always go back to 2008, where the whole world just imploded.
Yep.
It seems as if the indications that I'm getting that this particular economic turndown has not really been affecting community associations a lot, not nearly as what happened in 2008, because what you had in 2008 is you had a lot of people buying condos to flip condos, and you'll have one guy or an average Joe owned 5 condos, and then all of a sudden they're underwater, and it was like musical chairs, and he was done. And so he walked away from them, and we were just waiting for the banks. And since the value went down, the banks didn't want to take the bad debt off. And so you had a shortfall in your collections and the cash flow problems. I also like to mention that you're right. It's a lot about inadequate planning and the budget. I've seen associations where deliberately a manager will put together a good budget, an honest budget, and he'll hand it to his board of directors, and it's not politically savvy because it calls for an increase in maintenance fees. I'll tell you, I told you guys this. I'm one of the nation's. I'm considered a knowledgeable person in community associations. Okay, I was on the board. My board, they picked me for somebody left. I was on for just a few months, and I said, well, we have to raise our fees. We have to fully fund our reserves. We have to do preventative maintenance, capital improvements, and I was public enemy number one. And come elections, we just had elections. It's 300 people in my building, 120 voted. The 5 people who don't want to change the assessments or raise the assessments all got the same amount of votes, 105 votes. I got 15 votes. Okay. And so, people without experience who will promise, less costs. And also there's a lot of investors in the building. And investors don't really care. As long as they're getting their ROI, what do they care about curb appeal? If they're getting $2,500 to $3,000 to $3,500 a month rent, I try to warn them and tell them that curb appeal is important. You'll get more rent, but it doesn't matter. They don't want to pay. I've also found that it's interesting, and I'm going to give a little advice to some managers out there. Put your budget together. When the board of directors says no, 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 and they cut it down to an unreasonable amount, take this budget and put it in your drawer. Don't be too obnoxious, but next year you pull it out and it's the I told you so budget. And that's what it is that they're looking to fool themselves. A lot of boards of directors. I mean, you really shouldn't be trying to fool yourself. You should be honest. Zed, when you're working with your board of directors committee, do they try to manipulate or adjust the budget so that maintenance fees won't go up, but the budget just won't fit if it's too small for how much you're going to spend? How does that process work with you? How do you feel? I know many different communities have many different answers, but what's your general feeling about what goes on in that process?
I think you're right. I mean, I think you see a range of different HOAs handled in different ways. I would think that a lot of people want to get it right. They have good intentions to get it right, but they back into the numbers. They don't necessarily forecast what's real, and they want to keep things balanced. And sometimes it just doesn't work that way. Sometimes it requires that we have to, ask for more money, special assessment, whatever it may be. But boards do not want to have that conversation. So to keep things on the up and up, sometimes we do see certain maintenance costs not being added to the budget or reduced. We always see the lawn and the landscape guy get cut every year or try to get cut every year. It doesn't seem that there ever any sort of cost of living increase or any kind of bump in their pay. It's usually the opposite direction. And if a new board takes over, it's usually the number one thing they identify is where they can cut costs, because they know a guy who can cut the cost of the lawn service. And those things lead to us getting probably not as an accurate budget as we need. And then, like you said, at the end of the year, if we compared on what we should have been doing, there's probably a difference there that we had to make up at some point. So I think boards have good intentions. I don't think it's anybody trying to do anything wrong. They're just sometimes the tougher conversations about going after more money or spending the money where it needs to be spent is too tough, or it just is not worth the conversation at that specific time. So we get a budget that is politically sometimes correct, and then several months later we revisit and sometimes have to figure out how we're going to pay for certain things. So we see that from time to time. We also see a number of good boards who do good things with the budget and who try to live within that budget and stay fairly accurate with it. So I don't want to say all our boards are bad is where I'm going after, because we have a lot of good boards.
No. I know they all have, a lot of them have a lot of good intentions, but they are political animals, and you raise taxes, you lose voters. And these are governments to a certain degree. And sometimes I feel like in my building, and it's a very nice condominium here in Florida in Aventura, I feel like I'm living in the Soviet Union. I come downstairs and all of a sudden there's a security guy who's missing. He's been taken away in the night, and there's a lawn guy who's not here anymore. And the staff they're like disappearing into the night. Alan, let me throw the same question over to you. Do you think, now I know you don't like the term manipulate, but do you think that they try to adjust the budgets in such a way to get a square peg into a round hole? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, very much so, Mitch, and you're right. The word manipulate is not, that suggests something a little covert, and I don't know boards that try to do anything in that way to manipulate a budget. But the challenge that I see is what I would refer to as the legacy budget, the budget that's been in place for a while, and you've got new unit owners coming in. They see what the annual dues are, and they buy into a community association based on those dues. And what happens is you get this scenario with this legacy budget where folks are used to paying a certain amount, I don't know, per month, per quarter, annually, whatever it is. And then they start thinking in the context of, well, we can go up X amount of dollars this year, and we can go up X amount of dollars the next year. And just as Zed was suggesting, they don't necessarily think about the reality of cost increases of what's happening out there. We went through a few years ago, fuel costs jumping through the roofs, and consequently folks like contractors and landscaping folks that a lot of their work is based off of fuel saw their costs rise tremendously, and they tried to pass that through, and the result was boards basically trying to change over landscaping contractors and ended up with less for service just to save $1, but ignoring the fact that natural costs are going up up in the marketplace. So it's really a concern of legacy budgets, and there almost on occasion needs to be what in the banker parlance we refer to as a zero-based budgeting, where you don't look at where you are, where you've been. It's a matter of sitting down with all the current bids of your internet expense and your attorney and your insurance company, and building a budget off of where you are today and what you're going to experience off into the coming year of 2021. So it's not so much a matter of manipulating, it's getting trapped into the legacy issue of where you're at and not fully respecting that costs are increasing in a different pace than maybe what you're comfortable with. The idea of having when the consumer price index is going up, pick a number, 3%, but your budget needs to go up 6%. Well, folks get this perspective that, oh my gosh, our budget is out of control, whereas the two things are not connected. Your costs for running your association have to do with different types of costs that are within your community. So that's what I see that's the challenge is folks being real, respecting how things are increasing and they will always increase, and just biting the bullet. One of the very painful things that I've had to say to a lot of boards, and I've made presentations to unit owner meetings, is that the budget is not a reflection of what the unit owners can afford. The budget is a function of keeping the community operating properly. And a very difficult thing that's part of that is some people may not be able to afford to live there anymore because of the reality of the costs of keeping the place up and operating it.
Right. I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen often.
Yeah.
Actually, this wasn't on our notes, but I want to ask Zed a question, then I want to ask you, and then I'll carry on. Wasn't in our notes. Do you find that perhaps community associations are losing a lot of money due to frivolous lawsuits? Everybody's always suing somebody. Somebody says something, there's libel, there's slander. I'm going to sue the association is going to sue me. Condos and HOAs are creatures of statute. I'm going to ask Zed first. Do you have that issue in your area, Louisiana, where there's a little too much lawsuits going on and too expensive for your associations?
Well, we certainly have a number of threats, and of like any association, you'll have disgruntled people who will threaten the lawsuits and things like that. Fortunately, with the type of associations we manage, we're more homeowners associations, not so many condos or townhouse associations. I think we have less of that in our area. So I think if you have more condo associations, you're probably prone to have more legal actions in all different sorts of ways. But for us, homeowner associations are a little bit more buffered, maybe from some of that. Of course, we have from time to time people who, of course, the collection side on the legal side happens. That's normal. But the other types of lawsuits, not as much. So we've been fortunate on that end.
Oh, that's good. Alan, have you seen people overusing attorneys and wasting money in community associations?
Being on the financial side and the banking side of things, we're a bit more on the periphery. But I guess my anecdote that I would offer up is when I attend trade shows, EAI sponsored trade shows and CACM trade shows and such, it's always interesting to see that most of the largest portion of vendors are law firms.
Yes.
And I'm not dinging the attorneys, but they do tend to drive the better cars. So
yes,
there's a lot of them, and they've got cars, so they see this as a target-rich environment.
Right. You have five asphalt repair companies, 5 roofers, and 20 attorneys, community association attorneys. God bless them all, because we need them, because these are creatures of statute, and boards of directors aren't trained. All due respect to all the community association attorneys out there. So Zed, let me ask you a question. When you have an unexpected capital expense, something big goes boom, or something wrong, something terribly wrong, and you didn't have adequate reserves to cover it, or it wasn't planned for it not to happen, something out of left field, what do you typically do? How do you handle that?
Well, it's a big issue for us. We often see that a lot of our associations do not have adequate reserve accounts set up to cover unexpected costs. So, and the local banks don't like to lend money to, a lot of the banks won't deal with associations, especially the size of associations we're dealing with. We have a lot of, 100 homes to 200 home type of associations. So it is a challenge if that happens. And I think Alan would probably be the guy that I'm ready to listen to a little bit more on what they can offer, because it's something that is a need in the association world, especially with the types of associations we deal with.
Right. Now, that's always leads to the dreaded special assessment. I was sitting with my 92-year-old mother the other day, and I said, I take care of all of her finances. So I says, I got your assessments paid. And she went crazy. A special assessment. I said, no. Assessments are maintenance fees. I've got to learn when I speak to people, there's maintenance fees. Never use the word assessments, because people immediately think you're talking about a special assessment. I almost gave my poor mother a heart attack. And then talking about reserves, I said, you want to vote to fund the reserves or not to fund the reserves? And she's all there. She's 92. She's sharp. She says, son, I don't buy green bananas. Vote vote not to fund the reserves. But I said, Mom, the roof, it's just, she says, when that roof goes, I'll be gone. That's your problem, son. So let me get to Alan. I know the money has to come from somewhere when an unexpected expense happens. Of course, they can make a special assessment. So why should a community, and this is right in your wheelhouse, and this is why should a community take out a loan if they can make a special assessment? Make the case for a loan.
I guess I won't make the case for a loan because I don't want to sell it. The least cost option is for unit owners to pay for the project themselves. If they've built up reserves, even better. If they can handle special assessment, that's painful, but they can access their money at less cost. If somebody's got a savings account that's got $10,000 sitting in it, it's essentially earning no interest. So it's using that to offset the cost of their portion of a special assessment is an inexpensive access to money. If they drew on their own home equity line of credit, they get a tax exempt money by drawing off of that line of credit to pay their portion of the special assessment. A bank loan to support the capital maintenance, which is given to the association, it's to the association and then passed through to the unit owners indirectly. That's got an interest expense to it. That's got some fees attached to it. There's a closing cost attached to it. So a bank loan is an option, but I'm not going to sell it as much as it's preferable that unit owners use their own money. That's always the smartest way to go. Build reserves, and God forbid, try to avoid special assessments. But if you can't handle both, loans to associations do exist. And I got to tell you, the banks that know how to do these things, and there's a good number of them, love these things. I've done tens of thousands of them. I'm not exaggerating, across this country, and got through that huge, horrible recession. These loans don't go bad. In bank parlance, these are what's referred to as high quality assets. And the banks that understand how to do them really very, very well. And they can go out for periods that they can fund these capital maintenance projects, 100% of the cost of it, and some other aspects of it. But they can be repaid over 5, 7, 10 years. Some couple of banks out there even go as far as 15, but that's getting a little bit foolish for a lot of other reasons we won't go into. There's another tool that I want to speak to, and Mitch, you brought this up at the very beginning of our conversation, and it had to do with hurricanes and emergencies and things. There is a concept within this industry niche of what we refer to as an emergency line of credit for associations. So Zed would be interested in this with being down in Louisiana and his communities there. And it's a seasonal line of credit that's set up for emergency needs. Sometimes the terminology is for named storm damage, like Hurricane Zed comes running on through and wipes out a community. There's a line of credit in place that the association can draw on immediately. And there's a whole, I'll call it a formula, that they draw on it, they go through their recovery of fixing the property, maybe they get some insurance proceeds, and then if there's any hangover left of the loan, it's usually structured in such a way that can be paid off over time. So there is a tool out there that community association-based banks know of to help communities that are in those risk areas. But for traditional capital maintenance, there are a number of banks that are out there that are specialized to do this, and they do it very well. The best place to find those banks is to go to your national trade associations, your community association trade associations, and there are organizations like CAI and CACM and Florida. Oh God, Mitch, I'm forgetting the name of Florida something association.
Florida Community Association Professionals.
Each region has different names. There's one called ACTHA up in the mid-Atlantic states. So there are these national trade associations, and the banks tend to be all members of those trade associations, and that's the best place to find a bank that can do one of these loans in a skilled way. I would very much advocate that you not make yourself crazy and walk into the local bank and say, hi, I'm a community association and I need a loan, because they're going to just look at you cross-eyed.
Right, right.
And
I'd like to, at this point, just make a quick pitch or recommendation, not a pitch, for Community Association Institute. They're a great organization. A lot of people belong to them, a great resource. I think every community association should have some sort of connection with them, or read their blog, or have a connection somehow. Join them, go to their meetings. Their educational programs are excellent. Your boards of directors should not just commit themselves to a meeting once a month or once every 2 months, but you commit themselves to a CAI educational program. Zed, taking out a loan for a community association capital project allows the association members to pay over a period of time. That to me is the greatest advantage of taking out a loan. I mean, if I get a special assessment for $50,000, $5,000, $10,000, even though it may cost me a little money to pay it off, it irks me a little bit to, write a check for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000. What is your thinking on that? How do you work when you have to take out a special assessment? Do you try and talk to the board of directors and convince them to take out a loan so that this special assessment can be paid out over a period of time and there's not one big ouch to it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're in a couple conversations about that with some associations we're dealing with right now. They have to deal with a roof issue on 5 buildings or 6 buildings in one association. And we do have some reserves, but it probably will not be adequate enough to cover it. And so we are now positioning or talking with the board and getting ready for the annual meeting so we can present this to the association. And option number 1 right now is special assessment. And no one on the board really wants to have that conversation, and we sure don't either, but it is part of what we have to do. There is now, with some of the loan options out there, some conversation around either using the reserves to take out a loan and, use the reserves as collateral and take out a loan and then stretch it over time. And, ideally that would reduce the burden and the cost to the association. I mean, it would add some cost to the loan process, but the cash flow issue is what I'm concerned about if we use the reserves as collateral. But so we're going back and forth on this right now. So I think Alan's probably seen that scenario played out several times. It seems to be every board's a little different on how they want to handle things. But again, the special assessment is never the great conversation to have. So the loan process is something that we're going to have to really evaluate.
Right. And Alan, do you find out that, I think you touched on this already, but one of the main reasons that they would take out a loan for a special assessment is to take off, to spread the pain out a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it's for if there's a dollar shock to the community for a project, and they're looking at on a per unit basis, a significant amount of money, whatever that is for that community, and folks are just, they just not sure where they individually can come up with the cash. A loan is an option, and by the way, it doesn't have to be the only option. If you've got I'm going to use it for the sake of a round number, a $10,000 per unit cost of a project. Well, maybe the unit owners can handle $3,000 of that, and $7,000 could be what the loan application covers. It can be bifurcated. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. The one thing I would back to Zed is if you're dealing with a bank that's looking at cash as collateral, you're basically talking to a bank that doesn't understand community association lending. And
Right.
if you're a loan that ties up your cash, then effectively you have no cash. So you might as well as avoided the loan and just use the cash, because in both scenarios you're absent the cash. I'd encourage you to go to CAI and find one of those banks that
Right.
that will give you a loan, which, by the way, the collateral in those cases, in almost all cases, is an assignment of the assessment rights. That's a very strong
That's it.
piece of collateral.
That's
And
it.
it doesn't impact the unit owners. It doesn't impact the association. The bank is not collecting dues. It's just a document that gets executed and put in a drawer. And essentially, what happens on a monthly basis is the bank sends the association a monthly loan payment, and the association makes a payment on that. One of the other things that's kind of an advantage with a loan is something over time, and it also works with people buying and selling their units. Is, again, I'm going to use a round number of $10,000 on a per unit basis. That's spread out over 7 years, and maybe that causes every unit owner to experience, I don't know, $75 to $100 extra a month in their monthly payments. Well, if they sell their unit, or they win the lotto and somehow there's cash coming available, they can pay off their portion of the special assessment that remains and give that to the association, which applies it to the loan, and that unit becomes absent of any responsibility anymore of the loan to the association, and the loan amount tends to drop. It then drops quickly. So there's a lot of flexibilities in these loans on a per unit owner basis, even up front. I mean, if you've got a project that's $300,000 and you put out the special assessment to the unit owners and say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, you have until October 1st to pay your portion of the special assessment. Otherwise, you become a part of the monthly due on the loan. You might find as much as a third of the unit owners have access to low-cost cash and will pay in full their portion of the special assessment, of which then the remaining couple of thirds see their monthly dues go up to support the monthly loan payment. So on a per unit basis, the loans offer a lot of flexibility.
All right. Let's change gears a little bit now. We all are familiar with this terrible pandemic. By the way, Zed, I don't know if it's my business to tell everybody.
You good?
May I? Yeah, Zed is a survivor, a recoverer, and his family. Look, he looks the model of health. So I'm glad for you, and I'm happy that it did not damage you or your family. Let me ask you, have you found from this economy, this downturn in the economy, I mean, a lot of people are getting PPP checks and are getting unemployment checks and are doing quite well unemployed, maybe even making more money unemployed. Have you seen an uptick, a bump up in delinquencies, Zed, since this thing has started?
Well, no, we have not. I was actually pretty surprised by that. In March, we were looking forward a little bit and seeing, and we didn't know much about anything in March, but we did figure that we would start seeing a slowdown in dues payments. I thought it would be substantial. And by the way things have gone so far, it's very minor. It's probably not even I won't even know if I can give it a 2% or 3%. I mean, it's so small, and I couldn't even give it, I don't see it. So now that's not to say it's not going to happen. And we're still right in the middle of the thick of things. We're in South Louisiana. We have an office in Lafayette, Louisiana, and one in Baton Rouge. And so my whole family had COVID over the last 2 weeks. We're still quarantined and recovering, and very minor symptoms, but it's really hitting our area pretty hard right now. So I suspect that we're going to stay in. I think we're in phase 2 right now. That's going to stay for a while, and then hopefully kids will be going back to school next month on a reduced schedule. And but I think it's going to have a trickle down effect. I mean, I think it's going to be pushed off a little bit, but we are going to see stimulus money run out. We're going to see unemployment money. People go back to work, and things may get tougher, you know. So
Yeah.
I think we need a plan for it to be a rough, potentially could be a rough, maybe not this year, maybe toward the end of the year, early next year. We may see some things that are not so positive with collecting dues.
Yeah. Alan, how's your crystal ball working?
You know, in preparation for this, Mitch, I did a survey around my colleague bankers around the country about their HOA portfolios, and their experience is just what Zed was suggesting. They're not seeing anything, any kind of uptick in their existing portfolios around the country. The loan applications are coming in at a normal pace, and the what we refer to as the accounts receivable aging of those associations aren't seeing any kind of a discernible uptick. So far, astonishingly, I have to admit, astonishingly, this virus impact and resulting shutdowns in various places around the country does not seem to have had an impact on the collections within associations of any substance. However, I'm perplexed in that it hasn't happened, but also a little bit concerned that it's not over yet. And one of the things, this thing is still continuing on. There's a number of states that are seeing upticks in their cases. And the thing that's going on behind the scenes, which will have an effect on our economy, is think about a manufacturing location that makes whatever, whether it was a slaughterhouse or they make, I don't know, circuit breakers. Functionally, those in those production houses, folks are not literally but figuratively standing shoulder to shoulder making things. And now they're standing 6 feet apart and have other safety measures in place. And that means there's fewer people in production plants, which means fewer products are being put out, and you're seeing shelves a little bit more empty of product, or there's lead times on things that are a bit longer. And all that means that there's less amount of money moving around in the economy, which bodes for a recessionary environment. So that's my crystal ball, is this thing isn't over yet, and we've got quite a long way to go. So I very much urge boards and management companies to stay alert and stay on their collections assertively, so that they can discern when things might be turning and act on it quickly. Build reserves as much as possible in the meantime. You know, I think until the day comes that there is an inoculation for this, that where our economy is going to be impacted and our work life is going to be impacted. So it's still up in the air for quite a long time.
Right. All right. I'm going to try something here. This is the first time I'm using GoToWebinar, except Alan was smart enough to say, let's have a run through first. But I didn't run through this one. I'm going to put up a little poll, and it's going to be asking the audience what the delinquencies have been. And the poll is open, and we're collecting some responses now. And I got them. And okay. All right. So here's the answers to these questions. The three answers. The question is, have delinquencies increased since March? 37% say yes, a little bit. 3% yes by a substantial amount. And as you gentlemen have indicated, 60% have said no, not at all. So two things that tells me: number one, I know how to use the poll on my GoToWebinar, And number two, we haven't seen a tsunami of delinquencies or defaults hit yet, which I can go over. I can tell you that you know it may happen. Hopefully, it doesn't happen like it did in 2008. All right, getting back to Zed. Have you ever worked with a lender for a community association? I'm sure you have. And from your perspective, was it a difficult process?
Yes, I have. And it wasn't easy. We did have to, it took a little work from the association side to get it done. They were asking for personal guarantees on the loan, and board members didn't want to do that. And we're talking a local bank here in the area. So we actually, one association, we had to use a CD to help, fund it, basically
Right.
borrow against the CD. So, we have been really limited on the number of loans that we've done with our associations. So I think, one of the things I'm going to do for homework is to go back and learn about our options a little bit better. So,
Right, right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give a personal guarantee on a loan for a liver transplant.
Yeah.
Alan, can you go over some of the underwriting issues involved in getting the bank
Yeah,
to lend money?
One of the things that the banks go to, because these are all cash flow oriented loans, one of the first things they go to is they look at the delinquency level. And each bank has its own loan policy on how they look at that. But as an industry, most banks that specialize in this will lend on so long as there's not any more than 10% of the units over 60 days. You always have some folks 30 days, you always have some folks even
Right.
60 days.
Right.
But until an association's getting close to that 10%, and most definitely over the 10%, banks tend to be warm and fuzzy about things. The other thing that they tend to look at is future impacts of capital maintenance. If an association's coming today and looking at a roof, well, the bank will maybe ask that association, well, what's going to happen with the driveway system being repaved, or if there's a playground, or they'll ask questions about when are these other cash flow impacts going to hit during the time period of a loan. The other thing, which you actually were referring to earlier in this, and it had happened heavily during the last recession, is the number of renters that are in these community associations. Landlords have a tendency to be more apt to walk away and give up their ownership, and which causes a cash flow strain to the association. So when an association has more than 40% of the unit owners being landlords, that's when they start to get pretty squeamish. Again, different bank policies, some are 30%, but most of them tend to be about 40% and higher, being landlord oriented. Is when you get it squeamish. Now, that being said, there's a lot of our banks that are very comfortable in resort activities. There's a lot of banks that lend up into, I'll call it Vail, Colorado, or on the coastline of South Carolina, where there's resorts, and there's always second homes, or there are homes that are in rental pools, and in those very specific neighborhoods. Again, the banks that specialize in community associations know that, and they tend to be more comfortable with it. So delinquencies, future capital maintenance, and the landlord ratio is what banks tend to key in on, or the primary.
You haven't mentioned reserves. Will they consider if an association has adequate reserves?
Sadly, the banks have gotten used to the reality that the associations have little reserves.
That's a shame.
Appreciate the dynamic. If you're coming to be a bank for a loan, first thing out of the gate means you have little or no reserves, or you wouldn't be coming.
Right.
What may happen in that case, Mitch, is if the reserves are very minimal, I may say to an association, okay, your budget needs to be this amount to cover your operating expenses and this amount to cover your loan payment, but I'm also going to make you add a little bit more to your budget so you start adding to your reserves during the life of my loan.
Right. All right, Zed, I'm going to ask you the hardest question I asked today. And you know, when I sent out the survey to you, actually you didn't answer it. So now you're going to have to answer it off the cuff. When an association is desperate to complete a capital, something that cannot be avoided, and it cannot be delayed, and they cannot get a loan, and a special assessment is just going to result in a lot of people defaulting because they can't come out of their pockets. It's not in the economy. What do you do?
Well, you get creative, right? There's always a way to figure out a solution to some of these issues. And recently I had that with an association where they had to do some stucco work. And they didn't want to do a special assessment. They were way past budget on projects. So there was an offer for a board member to actually pay for the project and then be credited dues for a couple of years. And the board agreed to allow that project to happen. So that's not typical, but it was something that they allowed to do as a board, and they voted to do it, and so it got done. So, but yeah, I mean, you have to find solutions sometimes to these issues, and usually it's assessment, but on occasion you'll see something like that happen.
Let me go over that again. You had a project, you had a big bill, and somebody, a member of the association, stepped up and said, I'm going to pay my maintenance fees for the next 4 or 5 years.
Correct.
And that was okay.
That was okay. They allowed it to happen. The board voted to go ahead and move forward with that project.
All right. I don't know what the back office at PMI, how they went through that, the PMI books people, but I'm sure.
Well, it wasn't through us. Okay. So legality, this was a board decision. It was something that was agreed upon. It was a small association that was looking for a solution, and a board member offered the solution, and
wow.
They agreed to do it. So it wasn't something that we had initiated or put our blessings on. It was something that they agreed to do without our control, really.
Okay. Gentlemen, we're going to wrap this up. If there are any questions, please type them in and let me ask them. And while you're doing that, just let me introduce ourselves. My name's not Martin Urella, as you see there. I'm Mitchell Drimmer. And you could Google me and you could find me at Axela Technologies. PMI Integrity is over there. And I'm going to let Alan tell you how to get in contact with him, because he's got so many corporate entities that I'm a little confused myself. Because Alan has, I believe you have 2 corporate entities that's involved in this. So please tell the people how they could get in contact with you.
Yeah, there's 2 ways. There are 2 ways to get a hold of me, and I'll give you my phone number. It's 860-942-7902. Email address just is out there. Just Google my name, and one of my 2 websites will come up. I offer 2 kinds of services out there. One is just advisory. Community associations are just welcome to give me a call and talk through their needs, and I don't act like a paid consultant. I just talk to them and give them advice, and glad to help. The other thing, I have a website that acts as a loan placing entity. So that is under the name HOA Lending Exchange. And what that website does is you plug in some information about your loan need, and the system places you with banks that specialize in that niche. But again, Google my name, Alan Seilheimer, and one of these things will pop up.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to unmute the people who have raised their hands, and let's see if this works. It's the first one I'm going to ask is Carol Garcia. Carol, can you hear us? Okay, wait a minute. Let me just attendee is self-muted. Doesn't seem like, and then there's Alisher. No. Let me see if the questions, if anybody typed in any questions. Not that I could see of. I don't understand if we'll answer all the questions in later on in the seminar. So it looks like, gentlemen, I think that was a very good presentation, and that was very helpful. Once again, that's Zed LaCour from PMI Integrity Properties in Louisiana. I go there for the food and for the good company. Alan is in Utah. Well, I go there to see PMI. And my name's Mitch Drimmer. I'm down here in Miami, and I'm the collections guy. And look me up, and if you have any collections issues, we'd be glad to discuss them. So I do want to thank Alan and Zed very much for taking the time out of your busy days to meet with us. This will be recorded, and you'll find it on Zed's website, and Alan's website, and my website. And I thank you very much. Any last words, gentlemen?
No, good luck, everybody.
Good luck. Okay, Zed, glad to see you're feeling good, and keep on keeping on. Okay?
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.